Something I found quite fascinating, because this is a question I often receive from subscribers regarding the historicity or the composition of the Jesus character. But in your article, you say, eventually we realize that the various secondary elements of the Jesus story are not necessarily to be associated with any single stereotypical personality, given that they are largely astrological, astrotheological, sidereal, mythic, and symbolic. In light of what I often say to people in terms of the composition of the Jesus character being based on mythology, astrotheology, there are references to the king of Edessa, the Egyptian. How do you define or explain this biblical Jesus character?
Yeah, because if it was Jesus of Edessa, Jesus of Gamala, one of the pharaohs, one of the Davids, somebody over in Ireland, the stereotype is connected to the archetype. So we don't have that today. The way to explain that is that the ancients were defined by the fact that they could work with the stereotype and the archetype almost equally. So your Samsons, your Jacobs, your Moseses. Moses is based on at least 3 characters from ancient Sumeria. The deeds of a pharaoh were always likened to the movement of the sun king from before. If one of the pharaohs could do something, even if it was only a ritual, like a performance, a ceremony that Atum Ra had done or Amun Ra had done, all the better. That was great. That was great. Yeah, theater. Our pharaoh kills the evil serpent, just like Horus of old. And so the stereotype and the archetype worked very, very similar. So in the Americas, the shaman is distinguished by the fact he wears the same costume of his ancestors, the horned one. He paints his face black or whatever, right? He's from the underworld. In Egypt, they might have had a being who was dressed up in total green for their purposes, or would to represent fertility. Or one day that Pharaoh comes out all golden, because he's representing the sun. So there was a very close connection there between stereotype and archetype that we've completely lost today. In fact, the archetype has been thrown out and all we're left with is stereotypes. Or if we have the archetype, again, it's in this very ironed out way. We got Jesus, but no, don't reference anything to do with the sun. Sure, it's nothing to do with that. That's paganism. Or Christianity, tinged, as I said, with these Druidic elements. No. And then we have the work of the mythmongers to make sure that further deceptions are involved. The British Israelites, taking a very true story of returns of people from the East, but making it look like it's original. That's where they go wrong. 90% of the story of the British Israelites is correct. But the one flaw in it is that they make the movement of the Israelites from the East, from Babylon into the West, as the original movement. That's their deception, because it wasn't. It was a mere return of descendants of a much more antique race. And that's why you find, as we've talked before, the story of Lu, the story of the pre-Celtic kings are identical, killing the giant, fighting the great dragon, the Midgard serpent, and the little boy fights the great giant and all. It's all found all over the world. Or the coming on a great ship after a great cataclysm. We find that in ancient Ireland, as well as the story of the Exodus. And the priests just hope that your mind is going to be narrow enough so that you'll never look beyond and you'll never do the research. And so when I start my work with people like this, I always make sure I reference only people from within their world, the Bart Ehrmans, and start within the world of their known. Don't throw at them anybody like Lawrence Gardner or Ralph Ellis. Look, just go to the Herschel Shanks and the Barbara Thierings and the great Christian scholars and work with them. So it's easy transition so that you can massage, and then you move on to the Mustafa Gadellas and the Ahmed Osmans and all the people I recommend. But I also throw in, I'm one of the few people to do this, is the people from within the Christian world, writers, thinkers, scholars, Albert Churchward, and all these individuals who can now show you the roots, especially the astrotheological, because that's huge. Because remember, the cult of all cults is a stellar cult. We just talked earlier about the planet Venus. Well, there you are. To notice the movement of Venus, not only its own movement in the day, every day, but through the years and the centuries, to notice how it conjuncts with Mercury and the sun. And this might have all been started, as I talk about in Article 6, from the coming of the Great Comet. We don't know how. They'll never be able to tell whether it was started because we looked up because of the comet's disaster, or we were looking up prior to that. It's really impossible to tell. All we know is that there's a stellar cult. They worship the seven. They worship the polar axis, what's known as the circumpolar region in the north, and that was called Elysian. That was called Aru, the fields of Aru, from which we get the Elysian fields in the Christian world, and it was the original Garden of Eden. So if you can find out that the antitype of all antitypes, the Garden of Eden, that launches the book of Genesis, is actually something to do with the heavenly stars, it's all over. There's another one of those pieces that brings the whole house of cards down. Then what are these two trees? Well, there's the southern pole and the northern pole, and they were figured as two trees. And on it goes. And what then is the forbidden fruit? What is the serpent in the garden? What is the fall? Could it be a physical fall of the Arctic homeland, from which all of these treasures of knowledge then flowed into all the other cultures? Is that what's being spoken of the land of Nod and the great desert traversals and the pre-Adamites that are, although not mentioned directly in the Bible, it's probably obvious, isn't it? Where's Lilith come from? So we got these pre-Adamites that the official Bible doesn't want to talk about, but as I said, biblical scholars do. So start with those people, and a tale unfurls. So I've done my 30 years or more of it. Thank goodness for the internet. You can say, okay, how am I going to get this incredible story to the rest of the people? It's nice to find out that you have other scholars along the way that you didn't know about. That's marvelous. But it still leaves you with a duty in the journey of saying, how do I reach the public with my knowledge? So that is the age of the internet, the age of websites, the age of fists up in your face, making you defend it all the more. I'm for that, because then it sharpens, your wisdom, and it sharpens your delivery, and it makes you just a little bit more certain of your facts when you have to come up against criticism. So, but again, as I said, there's only certain people who can do that for zero reward. Everything else in life, you get a reward. You don't get any reward for this, except the knowledge that that a few people out there are seeing the true light, and using this deconstructive method to really get to the truth. That's what your real payment is, actually, because there's nothing but hardship along the way from doing it, and many attacks from too many people.